Welcome back to Cyberspace. I'm your host, Leslie Poston. This week, we're going to talk about a quiet little villain in your life. One that wears soft pants, hates conflict, and tells you to sit this one out. I'm talking about comfort. Comfort feels good, of course it does. It's familiar, it's safe, it's predictable. But what if I told you that comfort might be the reason you're stuck? It's the reason so many of us don't grow or speak up, don't take action, and don't change. Comfort is not just a refuge, it's a trap. The pursuit of comfort isn't just something we do, it's something that often stops us from doing anything else. And when it goes unchecked, comfort becomes a barrier to growth, a shield against the truth, and a permission slip for harm. So today, let's take an uncomfortably honest look at why comfort is the enemy of progress. We live in a world that sells comfort like it's some kind of salvation. Every ad, app, or piece of technology is designed to make things easier, faster, and smoother. Our thermostats learn our preferences, and our phones predict our words. Our cars practically drive themselves. We've made an art form out of avoiding discomfort, emotionally, physically, cognitively, and even politically. But here's the catch. Growth doesn't live in ease. It lives in friction. Psychologically, we're wired to prefer what's familiar, certain, and what feels safe, but that very wiring is what makes change so hard. And it's what keeps people, entire societies even, stuck in patterns that no longer serve them. Or worse, patterns that actively hurt others and themselves. We think of comfort as neutral, but it's not. It's selective, and it has a cost. Too often, that cost is progress. Think about it. When did you last learn something that didn't challenge you? When did you last grow without feeling some discomfort? Even physical fitness requires stress on your muscles to build your strength. Your comfort zone isn't just a metaphor, it's a prison with walls made of habit, convenience, and the familiar ache of staying exactly where you are. The problem is that we've turned comfort into a virtue, confusing ease with goodness and convenience with progress. But comfort doesn't innovate and it doesn't heal. It also doesn't solve problems, it just makes problems easier to ignore. To understand why we cling to comfort, let's start with how our brains are built. Human brains are predictive engines. They don't just process information, they constantly try to reduce uncertainty. That's why we feel relief when things make sense or when events follow a pattern. There's a concept called cognitive ease, the idea that when something feels easy to process, we tend to accept it more readily. We're more likely to believe it, like it, and even remember it. But when something feels hard, whether it's a word we don't understand, a complex idea, or a challenge to our worldview, our brains push back. The effort feels bad, so our brains flag it as unsafe, even when it isn't. And that's why new information, especially if it contradicts what we already believe, can feel like a threat. Not because it is, but because it takes energy to make sense of it. So we'll often reject it without even realizing we're doing it. This built-in bias toward comfort leads to mental shortcuts. Instead of critical thinking, we reach for confirmation. Instead of curiosity, we reach for control. Our brains operate on what we call the principle of least effort. We're constantly looking for ways to conserve mental energy and take the path of least resistance. This isn't laziness, it's actually survival. Our ancestors needed to save energy for actual threats, not abstract concepts. What's fascinating is that this happens at a neurological level. When we encounter information that conflicts with our existing beliefs, the anterior cingulate cortex, or the part of our brain that monitors for conflict, literally lights up like we're in physical danger. The amygdala, our threat detection system, starts firing, and meanwhile, areas associated with physical pain become active. Your brain is treating intellectual challenge like bodily harm. But in the modern world, this efficiency system totally backfires. The things that challenge us intellectually, emotionally, and morally aren't threats to our survival. They're opportunities for growth, but our brains treat them like dangers to avoid. This is part of why facts don't change minds, which we've talked about in an earlier episode. It's why logic doesn't win arguments and why evidence often makes people double down on false beliefs rather than reconsider them. The comfort of being right, even when we're wrong, feels safer to the brain than the discomfort of admitting an error. Another theory that regular listeners may have become familiar with, cognitive dissonance, explains what happens when we hold two conflicting beliefs or behaviors. It creates psychological discomfort, and rather than resolve that conflict through growth, most of us resolve it through avoidance or rationalization. This is where motivated reasoning comes in. It's when we bend the facts to fit our feelings rather than the other way around. We're not thinking to find truth. We're thinking to protect our emotional comfort. It's not just intellectual dishonesty, it's emotional self-preservation. And it's so common. People will fight harder to protect their self-image than they will to improve it. They'll cling to harmful beliefs simply because changing them might mean admitting they were wrong. This is one of the core reasons that comfort kills progress, because change is painful and comfort makes pain feel intolerable. Here's what's happening in your brain when someone challenges your beliefs. Within milliseconds, your posterior cingulate cortex, involved in self-referential thinking, becomes hyperactive. Your brain is essentially asking, what does this mean about me? At the same time, areas associated with social threat activate, as if your identity is under attack. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thinking, actually becomes less active. You're literally less capable of logical thought when your comfort level is threatened. Consider how this plays out in someone gets actionable, true feedback at work, but it stings. Instead of sitting with that discomfort and asking what they could learn, they start to explain it away. The feedback giver just doesn't understand them, or the situation was unfair, or the criticism was personal. And while certainly there are office situations we've talked about in other episodes where you might be bullied at work, etc., sometimes the feedback is true and your brain isn't letting you accept it. Or think about relationships. How often do fights escalate because one person can't tolerate the discomfort of being wrong? How many partnerships end not because of incompatibility, but because neither person could sit with the discomfort of changing? This pattern is everywhere once you see it. Comfort as the enemy of accountability, of learning, of becoming better than we were yesterday. Let's apply this idea socially. In conversations about race, especially among white people, discomfort is often treated like injustice. When someone brings up systemic racism, white listeners may feel called out, implicated, or exposed. That feeling of discomfort gets interpreted as being attacked, even when no attack is happening. Research on white fragility explores this. When discomfort shows up, it often triggers emotional reactions like defensiveness, withdrawal, or tears. That doesn't just derail the conversation, it recenters it on white feelings, and in doing so, it protects the very power structures that marginalized people are trying to change. One psychologist called racism a moving walkway at the airport. You don't have to actively be hateful to participate. You just have to stand still. Comfort in this case is standing still. And standing still helps the system stay exactly as it is. What's particularly insidious is how this triggers what we call emotional hijacking. When white people feel uncomfortable in racial conversations, their sympathetic nervous system activates, their heart rate increases, stress hormones flood their system, blood flow redirects from the prefrontal cortex to more primitive brain regions. They're literally in fight or flight mode, making rational discussion nearly impossible. But here's the key. This physiological response isn't triggered by actual danger. It's triggered by the threat to their racial worldview, by the discomfort of potentially being seen as complicit in racism. Watch how this unfolds in real time. Say a person of color shares an experience of discrimination. And instead of listening, white listeners immediately start explaining why this probably wasn't racism. They're not being malicious. They're trying to stay comfortable. Because if racism is still a problem, then they might have to do something about it, and doing something would feel uncomfortable. So they minimize, redirect, or try and make it about intent instead of impact. They might turn the conversation toward their own discomfort, with being seen as complicit, and in prioritizing their emotional comfort, they silence the very voices that could help create change. This is not just individual psychology, it's really structural. Institutions, policies, and systems are designed to maintain this comfort for some at the expense of others. And when those benefiting from the system, even if it's just a small amount, feel uncomfortable, that discomfort is treated as a crisis that must be resolved, often by stopping the conversation altogether. Psychologists conducted experiments in the 60s after the murder of a woman named Kitty Genovese, who was reportedly attacked while bystanders failed to intervene. What they found was unsettling. When people are in groups, they are less likely to act. Responsibility gets diffused. But it's not just this diffusion of responsibility, it's discomfort avoidance. Speaking up, stepping in, or helping someone in distress, well, these things often feel uncomfortable. You might look foolish or face backlash. You might have to take a stand. And so people stay silent even when they know better. Modern studies on moral disengagement suggest that people rationalize inaction to reduce guilt. They tell themselves, it's not my place, or, oh, I don't want to make it worse, but really what they're doing is choosing comfort over action. And that's not neutral, that's complicity. The neuroscience behind this is revealing. When we witness someone in distress, our mirror neuron systems activate. We literally feel an echo of their pain. But instead of moving us to action, this often triggers what we call empathic distress. Our anterior insula and anterior cingulate cortex light up, creating genuine discomfort. To regulate this uncomfortable feeling, our brains deploy coping mechanisms. We look away, we rationalize why it's not our problem, or we try and convince ourselves that someone else will help. We're literally neurologically motivated to avoid the discomfort of witnessing suffering, even when that avoidance enables more suffering. Think about how this shows up today. Someone makes a racist or sexist joke at work, and the room goes quiet. Everyone knows it's wrong, but no one speaks up. Why? Because speaking up would be uncomfortable or create tension. It might make the joke teller defensive. It might make things awkward. So people let it pass. They tell themselves they're keeping the peace, but keeping the peace for whom? Certainly not for the people targeted by the joke. The comfort of avoiding conflict becomes more important than addressing the harm. Or consider social media. How often do you see people sharing articles about injustice, expressing their outrage, but then doing nothing offline? The sharing feels like action, but it's actually a form of moral licensing, doing just enough to feel good without the discomfort of real change. The bystander effect isn't just about emergency situations, it's about the daily choice between comfort and courage. And most people choose comfort, even when we know better. System justification theory helps explain why people often defend systems that harm them or harm others. According to this theory, people are motivated to see the world as orderly, fair, and just, even when it's not. Why? Because believing that the world is unfair is deeply uncomfortable. It introduces moral obligation and implies that something must change. And change comes at a cost, especially to those who benefit from the current system. So people convince themselves that inequality is earned, that poverty is a failure of character, racism isn't structural, it's just a few bad apples, and these narratives preserve comfort by protecting the illusion of fairness. But illusions don't create justice, they sustain injustice. And they do it through the very human desire to feel okay. What's remarkable about system justification is that it operates even against people's self-interest. We're living that large right now. Brain imaging studies show that when people defend unfair systems, their dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, or the area responsible for cognitive control, works overtime to suppress awareness of injustice. Meanwhile, areas associated with threat detection remain hyperactive when confronted with evidence of systemic unfairness. Essentially, your brain treats information about injustice as dangerous and actively works to maintain the comforting illusion that everything is fair. This plays out everywhere. People defend capitalism even when it's crushing them, because imagining an alternative is uncomfortable. They support politicians who work against their interest because admitting they were wrong would shatter their identity. They rationalize environmental destruction because facing the huge problem of climate change would require changing how they live. The system doesn't have to be good, it just has to be familiar. Familiar always feels safe to the brain, even if it's slowly killing us. Consider how people react to criticism of American systems. Instead of examining whether the criticism is valid, many people immediately defend the system. If you don't like it, leave, or other countries are worse, at least we're free. These aren't arguments, they're thought-limiting phrases, comfort mechanisms. Because if the system is broken, we might have to fix it. And fixing it will require admitting it was broken in the first place, and that's uncomfortable. It's easier to defend the familiar than to build something new and better. There is a famous anecdote by a sociology professor who ran the same thought experiment every year for quite some time. He said his students needed to take a vote, which they could do anonymously. If every student in the class voted yes, the entire class would get an A and skip having to take the final. But if even one student voted no, everyone keeps their current grade and must take the exam. Every year, at least one student voted no. Not because they want to take the final, but because they felt it's unfair to give an A to students who didn't, quote, earn it, even though they would benefit from the outcome as well and it cost them nothing. What's happening here isn't about merit, it's about control and the illusion of deservedness. It's about the discomfort that comes with perceived unfairness, even when fairness would benefit everyone. This is a microcosm of how society resists collective good. We'd rather suffer equally than thrive unequally. And comfort with familiar rules often outweighs the discomfort of questioning those rules. The psychology behind this resistance reveals something a little disturbing about human nature. When we see others potentially getting something unearned, it triggers what we call inequity aversion, but only when others might benefit more than us. Our brains process this perceived unfairness through the same neural pathways that register physical pain. The anterior insula becomes active, creating genuine anguish at the thought of someone else getting ahead without suffering. You might be hearing some of this rear up again in the context of GLP-1s and fat phobia. But here's the twist. This same neural activity doesn't occur when we're the ones potentially benefiting unfairly. The pain is selective. It only hurts when others might gain. Think about how this applies to real-world policies. Universal health care would benefit almost everyone, but people oppose it because someone might get something for nothing. Student loan forgiveness would stimulate the entire economy, but people who already paid their loans feel it's unfair. The pattern is always the same. I suffered, so you should suffer too. I worked within the system, so this system must be good. Changing the rules now would invalidate my experience, and that's uncomfortable. So people vote against their own interest to preserve their comfort with familiar suffering. They would rather everyone struggle than admit that in the rich world that we live in, struggle is not necessary. Let's go even further. When comfort gets tangled up with fear, it can become something darker. Research on loss aversion shows that people fear losses more than they value gains. That's why people will go to great lengths to protect what they have, even if it means denying others the same. Now, layer in relative deprivation, the belief that someone else is going to get more than you, even if you have enough. That perception leads to resentment, withdrawal, and sometimes harm. This explains why people oppose policies that would help everyone, like we mentioned universal health care or student loan forgiveness, if they feel like someone else is getting too much. They would rather no one have help than experience the discomfort of someone else benefiting more visibly and getting more. And that's how comfort can turn people against their own best interest. Because comfort isn't just about being okay, it's about staying on top. When people perceive that others are gaining something they don't have, it activates their brain's pain matrix, the same network that responds to physical injury, but it also triggers areas associated with social rejection and humiliation. Your brain is literally interpreting someone else's gain as your loss, your embarrassment, and your failure. This is creating malicious envy, not just wanting what others have, but wanting to take it away from them. The relief comes not from getting more, but from others getting less. Consider how this shows up in workplace dynamics. Someone gets promoted, and instead of celebrating or learning from them, colleagues find reasons why they didn't deserve it. The discomfort of someone else succeeding gets transformed into resentment, gossip, or sabotage. Or think about housing policy. Communities oppose affordable housing, not because it would hurt them, but because they can't tolerate the idea of someone paying less for what they paid more for. Their comfort depends on maintaining hierarchies, even artificial ones. This isn't just selfishness, it's scarcity thinking made toxic. The belief that there's only so much success, happiness, or safety to go around, and if someone else gets more, there's less for me. That's not how progress works. Progress is not a zero-sum game. When everyone has health care, everyone benefits from a healthier society. When everyone has education, everyone benefits from innovation and reduced crime. When everyone has opportunity, everyone benefits from increased prosperity. Yet comfort with inequality often trumps logic about collective benefit, and people would rather preserve familiar hierarchies than create unfamiliar abundance. So, what do we do with all of this? We build our capacity for discomfort. Therapists call it distress tolerance. Mindfulness practitioners call it non-reactivity. Educators might call it a growth mindset, but whatever name you give it, it's the ability to stay present with discomfort, hold it, examine it, and learn from it instead of running from it. This is not about martyrdom, it's about endurance. The kind that allows you to face hard truths, to admit when you're wrong, and to listen to voices that make you uncomfortable. It requires unlearning, relearning, and changing, even when it's painful. Progress doesn't ask us to be perfect, it just asks us to be brave, to be okay with being uncomfortable and keep going. And that means comfort can't be your compass, not if you want to grow, or not if you want to help, and definitely not if you want to make anything better. The research on psychological flexibility shows us that people who can tolerate distress without immediately trying to fix it, avoid it, or explain it away are more resilient, creative, and capable of change. Their brains actually develop stronger connections between the prefrontal cortex and emotional centers, allowing for better regulation under stress. When you practice sitting with discomfort, you are literally rewiring your brain to handle challenges more effectively. You are building what we call cognitive control, the ability to override automatic responses and choose more adaptive behaviors. Start small. Notice when you're avoiding something because it feels uncomfortable and sit with criticism instead of immediately defending yourself. Listen to perspectives that challenge your worldview without needing to argue. Practice saying, I was wrong, or I don't know, or I need to think about that. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because the other side of discomfort is everything you say you want: growth, connection, progress, justice, and change. The question isn't whether discomfort will come, of course it will. The question is whether you'll run from it or learn from it. So, the next time you find yourself pulling away from something or someone, turning off the news, ignoring critique, or staying silent in a crucial conversation, Ask yourself, am I protecting myself or am I protecting my comfort? Comfort is not neutral and comfort is not free. It comes at the expense of your growth, integrity, and someone else's dignity. It may feel safe, but discomfort is where the good stuff lives. Thanks for listening to Cyberspace. I'm your host, Leslie Poston, signing off. If you found this episode useful or, better yet, a little uncomfortable, share it, rate it, comment on it, tell a friend, and join me next week. In fact, subscribe so you don't miss a week. And remember, stay curious.